Part 14. Law and Order. Some states abolished slavery as early as 1780, but it wasn't until 1865 that the federal government abolished slavery completely. Until that time, slavery was legal. And like all laws, there were rules that needed to be followed. Hollywood likes to claim that random people could abuse any slave they saw. But there's nothing to permit that, in the slave codes. In this scene, from the 1977 miniseries, Roots, Tom is a slave who is working for Mr. Harvey. He is in town, picking up some supplies. Mr. Brent, a storekeeper, walks up to Tom and demands that Tom must stop what he's doing, and pour him a cup of water. Since this is a story that Alex Haley wrote, Tom obeys, and gets Mr. Brent a cup of water. But in reality, Tom has no obligation to serve Mr. Brent. Just as Mr. Brent is not obligated to go to another store down the street and help Mr. Harvey's wife buy a hat. It's just as ridiculous to claim that a merchant is a merchant, and he must serve any random person outside of his store, as it is to claim that a slave is a slave, and he must serve any random person who wants to bully him. That's why I'm skeptical about the narrative presented in these stories. In a court of law, there are rules against tampering with evidence. When someone stands before a judge, wearing a phony neck brace after getting a tiny scratch on their car, it's clear they're over-dramatizing the incident, just to collect a large settlement. In 1955, Emmett Till was brutally murdered by two white men. This incident was highlighted by people who were anxious to launch the civil rights movement. They held an open casket funeral, and displayed Emmett's body for all to see. However, it's arguable that in their effort to gain national attention, they broke the first rule of evidence tampering. They paid the morticians to damage Till's body for publicity photos. They gouged out his eye, broke his jaw, dented his forehead, and stuffed sawdust into his cheeks until he looked like the guy from the Goonies. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but it's easy to make this argument, because there were no official autopsy photos of Emmett Till's body presented in court. Only the publicity photos. So the jury had to consider the fact that Emmett's body had been tampered with, and they declared they could not convict, based on the evidence presented. That's the rule of law. In 1995, O.J. Simpson was acquitted of murder, because some false evidence was planted. A blood-covered glove was found at the scene, and it was claimed to have belonged to O.J. Simpson. But when O.J. was asked to try on the glove in court, it didn't fit, proving it was not his. The jury in both cases were not racist. They were doing their job, and had to consider the possibility that false evidence was presented. Therefore, they had to vote, not guilty in each case, respectively. Now if we could only get our political system to follow these rules, we might have some legitimate leadership in this country.